Hey, it's Michael here from Oilerslive and the Heavy Hockey Podcast. I've got as my guest today Eric Friesen, who is a regular contributor at The Hockey Writers. Eric has been a guest on the show numerous times, is always welcome, and is great to chat hockey with and chat Oilers, current state of the Oilers. Of course, this is probably one of the first very positive podcasts I've got a chance to record since I've started the Heavy Hockey and the Oilerslive podcasts. So please have a listen. Also, just a reminder, December 9th at the Downtown Community Arena in Edmonton is the Oilerslive Cup. It is free registration. So go contact me on Twitter at Oilerslive. Voluntary donations, so $1, $2, $5, $10, $50, $100, whatever you can donate will go 100% to the Chinook Autism Society. We're happy to support them as that money will go to helping at-need families with sensory tools for their autism children. So again, have a listen today. We talk about the first 10 games, wonderful games they were, 6-3-1 for the Oilers, and talk about what we see as happening in the next 10. Thanks again, and enjoy the show.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and guests. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.
So I'd like to welcome Eric Friesen to the show. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, thanks, Michael.
So thanks for joining me today, Eric. I think this is in my history of recorded podcasts. Today marks a unique day in that we have something actually positive to podcast about, and so I hope I'm looking forward to today and having a chat with you and hearing what you have to think about the Oilers. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. If I think back to the other appearances that I've been on the show, we've talked about McDavid's push for 100 points down the stretch. We talked about the World Championships. We did, I think, a draft recap. So, yeah, it's kind of nice to be talking about the Oilers after a bit of a winning streak here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was something that I think if we go back, and Stauffer had a tweet today about it. I mean, how many people can honestly say they weren't worried at 0-2? I would say, that I was worried, but I didn't panic. How about yourself?
Well, I mean, I kind of thought they would lose the Boston game, but I was fully expecting them to beat New Jersey. They'd never lost to Jersey since Taylor Hall was traded there, and the Oilers had always kind of had their number. Plus, I thought New Jersey might regress a little bit this year, but it looks like they've actually got off to a pretty good start. So, yeah, I at 0-2, people were already talking about, like, is this a must-win game against the lowly Rangers? And thank goodness they pulled out a win there, and that kind of started everything because it was looking grim. But yeah, here we are. I think it was that third period in Winnipeg that could turn out to be the turning point for the whole season, actually.
Yeah, so I go back to that Rangers game, and if you'll recall, I think I had. I always have, and every one of us has a tweet that turns out to be more popular than any of your other tweets. It gets a lot of shares, a lot of likes, and one of those for me was right before that Rangers game. Mm-hmm. On how in Game 3 we were already at the most important game of the season. And I thought that, my point was not that it was, in fact, the most important, but that it was, it was silly of us to look at it that way. But, it was a good win. I didn't, I remember watching that game and thinking to myself, it was nothing spectacular. We, eked out a win against bottom feeding team at that point, albeit early. For as well as what you said, I mean, the big turning point was the third period of the Winnipeg Oilers game.
I think there was a few factors at play there too, because after going 0-2, if you looked at the Oilers' schedule ahead for the month of October, even the most optimistic Oilers fan never would have thought the Oilers would go on a 6-1-1 run in those 8 games. So when you're looking at the rebuilding Rangers club, that almost has to be a guaranteed W on the schedule, because you know how tough it's going to get after that. I think the fear in oil country was that if the Oilers drop that game to the Rangers, what's the rest of the month going to look like? Because if we can't even beat them, what's going to happen when Washington and Pittsburgh and Boston come through and, playing the Predators twice and the game coming up against the Jets at the time? So there was, I think, real fear that the Oilers could end up with a 2-8 or a 1-9 start in their first 10 games. And the fact that we're sitting here, 1 point out of first place in the Pacific at 6-3-1, that's a pretty good turnaround. And I think that the panic has definitely been kind of set back, and you see how excited the guys were. Like, it just seems like a real loose, fun group right now. They're enjoying winning and coming to the rink, and we're in a much better spot than we thought we would be at this point of the season.
Yeah, there is no doubt. I think probably what I would have considered a success was an even 5-5, given the lineup.
If you would have told me in September that the Oilers would come out of October at a 500 record, I would have been ecstatic. And now you look, we got 1 game left against the Minnesota Wild tomorrow night, and that could, even if we lose that one, we still come out above 500. So that's a huge win. And now that we start to kind of reflect, it's probably good that the Oilers played all these tough teams early. First of all, because it really united the group and made them kind of buckle down and say, we got to play these elite teams who all had 100+ points last year. But they're also not in mid-season form either. So they haven't caught up to speed yet. They're not firing on quite all cylinders that they would be in December or January or February. And the Oilers are going to have an easier schedule the rest of the way now. So all things considered, we came out of the toughest month of the season with a positive record, and it's never easy, but the Oilers' schedule from here on out is definitely not going to be as tough as what we went through this month.
Yeah, and what sort of drove it home for me was listening to Jeff Merrick on Sportsnet. They do that noon Toronto-based program where they have the round table. And Merrick was talking about the Oilers' schedule, Washington, Pittsburgh, Nashville twice, and he had written them off. And in fairness, that's what we were all worried about, right? Is and I've used the term, but I used it because I've heard it by Merrick and Friedman and John Shannon and Stauffer. They all called it the murderer's row. Mm-hmm. And that first 10 games was, there were no gimmies. The Rangers, who have a pretty decent team on paper, I think, that was the only gimme we had. And for them to come out 6-3-1, well, that's a success. So that leads me to let's chat about, what are the good things that you've seen from this club, and what's come together for us, do you think as the Oilers, in order to make it 6-3-1? What do you think happened?
Well, the obvious one, of course, is going to be Connor McDavid, because 17 points in his first 10 games. I think they tweeted out that it hasn't been done by an Oiler in almost 30 years. So that's a pretty incredible start, and that's almost what we've come to expect from him. I don't know if he's going to finish with 139 points, which I think he's on pace for at the moment. But, he's been everything that we thought he'd be. He's taken another step forward this year, and it just shows at that 21, 22 age, he's really starting to come into his prime scoring years. And Draisaitl, after a slow start, has really started to look like himself again. He's producing points. He's getting a lot of goals lately, too, which has helped. I think he's up to 6 goals in 8 games now, and most of them have come in the last few. And then, of course, Nugent Hopkins, who I just wrote a post about for the Hockey Writers, and it should be out tomorrow or maybe even later today, depending on when it gets edited. But just to see him finally thriving in an offensive role, you look at how he was mainly used. When he was part of the trio up front with Eberle and Hall, those guys were given a little more offensive license to be freewheeling and make scoring their primary focus. But Nugent Hopkins was always expected to be the defensive conscience on that line. And not that he isn't, but now that he's playing on a line with 3 guys who are all defensively responsible, McDavid and Yamamoto, he doesn't have to be the only one who's going to be back checking to get back to the zone first and try and steal that puck and turn back and transition the other way. So the fact that he's got those other guys with him is a huge benefit. But, of course, playing with Connor McDavid, that's the most coveted spot. And you look at how those two are thriving off each other. I think it's perfect, and having Draisaitl as the number 2 center allows Nugent Hopkins to be fixated on the wing, and we're seeing great results out of him. And not to get long-winded here, but the defense has been great too. I think I've really liked Clefbaum and Larson, and Nurses look good too. Cam Talbot in net a little shaky, but he's turned it on as of late after kind of a slower start than he would have liked. The last few games have been really good. So all things considered, there aren't too many negatives with this club right now.
So, I look at that, and you bring up some good points. McDavid's McDavid, right? We completely expect that. What I did notice, and we've all been critical of it as Oilers fans, is the Eastern-based media and their reporting of Matthews and maybe overhyping of Matthews. One of the things I noticed, though, was after that Winnipeg game, how that changed, how they began talking about McDavid again, as the superstar that he is. And, I think that what we really witnessed there was him saying, now's the time, right? Like, now's the time for this team to take control. Yeah. And he led that path. So as a leader, he was outstanding in that game. So there's that. Draisaitl, it took him a little bit to warm up, but I think he had to realize that he was capable of leading his own line and doing something without McDavid. And I noticed, I think it was the Pittsburgh game that he really, seemed to turn that corner in my mind, and was happy to see that happen. Somebody who you left out was Clefbaum. I mean, how much did that shoulder injury hurt his season last year? He's not been spectacular, but he's been capable. Right?
He's looked like a top pairing defenseman. And, a healthy Clefbaum is huge to this team. I know there are some Oiler fans who really want Bouchard to be given the power play minutes over him, but he's going to be in that role eventually. Evan Bouchard, I believe, will be the Oilers' number 1 defenseman one day. He's going to be their absolute stud on the back end, maybe an Alex Pietrangelo type or a John Carlson type, is someone who's going to be that real big, strong offensive player. And I think it's a little early, though. He's 19 years old. He's probably going back to junior. So I'm not surprised that Todd isn't leaning on him as hard as Clefbaum, because you might as well give Clefbaum the reps now if he's going to be your guy for the full season. If Bouchard is going to be going back to junior this week, then why would he be getting all the cherry minutes on the power play when Clefbaum is the one who's going to be here? I think you have to reward your best players, and Clefbaum has played well enough to deserve that. and it's his spot to lose. Yes, he's a left shot as opposed to Bouchard being a right shot, which I know we saw him score a great goal the other night where he didn't celebrate. But it's good to have those options, and I think you're right to bring up Clefbaum because although he doesn't have a goal yet, he's playing great this year.
Yeah, he's been solid, and it's defense, of course, was one of the major concerns going into the season. Now, let's maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about that, like concerns going forward, because as much as we've been getting good defense from our, I'd say our top four, Clefbaum, I think Larson's been solid, Nurse has been solid, and I think Russell, if you're not a big Russell fan, I think he's played some good minutes for us. So the problem that we have, and I think you'll agree, is in that 5-6 space.
Yeah.
What did the Oilers do going forward? I mean, this is a big area of concern. I mean, when we've had goals against, let's be fair. I mean, it's been Garrison or Benning, right? If not the combo of the two that have had the toughest time out there. I don't know that you can go full season with those two leading your third D. Your thought there?
Yeah, no, I don't see those guys long term. I mean, Gravel is probably going to be a nice number 7 for you, but when the Oilers really become a competitive team, I'm not sure Benning's going to be a part of it. He's been a nice placeholder. He came in 2016 when the Oilers were still an unproven team. And in fairness to him, he looked fantastic during the 2017 playoffs, especially one game against the Ducks where he was quarterbacking the power play and set up a really beautiful goal. I think it was the one where they blew them out in Game 6. But yeah, he's never been a guy who struck me as this is a future top 4 defenseman on a good team. He on a good team, he's maybe a number 6 at best. Like, he can make some big hits. He moves the puck decently well, but nothing to write home about. So I would say Benning won't be a part of this team long term. It's nice that you have the local boy come play for his childhood team, but really, I'm looking at guys like Caleb Jones and Ethan Bear coming up and stealing a spot, and they've got other guys like William Lagesson down the pipeline. So it's going to be tough for a guy like Benning to stay in. Even that Joel Pearson over in Sweden, who they signed, if you remember, in the summer,
yep.
But they allowed him to stay back for one more year. Apparently, he's been doing well too. So I think Caleb Jones could actually be the next call-up. And I've always been a bigger fan of Ethan Bear, mainly because of his great release. But as good as that one-timer is, Caleb Jones is just such a great skater. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's on this team by mid-season because he just skates the puck out of trouble so effortlessly. He's not always going to get a point, but he creates offense in different ways. If the puck's not in your end, you're contributing at the other end of the ice. So he might skate it out of the zone, make a pass to Nugent Hopkins, say, and then Nugent Hopkins gives it over to Yamamoto, and then McDavid finishes it off. So those three get a point. Jones isn't even on the score sheet, but that whole play started with him.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen throughout his junior and AHL career. Modest numbers like in his rookie AHL year, he had 17 points in 58 games. This year, he's actually off to a pretty decent start with 4 goals in 6 games. And I don't know if you remember, during the rookie camp, he was actually showing some pretty good skill too. Oh,
him and Bouchard looked amazing together, I thought. Yeah.
So I think that's a guy who is really going to be I shouldn't say impact, but he's going to be a positive player for the Oilers when he arrives. I'm not sure when that'll be, but when he does get here, he's gonna make some type of an impact on the team, and I'm looking forward to that guy.
So what do you think happens near term? I mean, for the Oilers, do you think is this something a cause for immediate concern, or do you think we can get by with Garrison and Benning right away, or do we need to do something right away?
Well, part of me says you don't mess with a winning lineup. So you've got a team that's had some success. They've beaten some good teams, but there's still 72 games to play. We don't know. Like at some point this year, the Oilers are going to lose 3 games in a row. And, are we going to push the panic button then? I think we have to try and keep a little more even keel, as do the players, obviously. They're the ones on the ice. But, as fans, we seem just as invested. So it's important to not panic when they do lose, 2 or 3 in a row. That being said, let's look at the defense. It's probably not in the top half of the league at the moment. When some of the guys that we were talking about a minute ago arrive, it'll be closer to top 15, top 10 D-core in the league. But right now, there's still a few weak links there, and I think the third pairing is one of them. And obviously, Todd McClellan is hesitant to put that third pairing out, although he has a history of cutting down his lineup in the third period anyway.
Yeah,
but I agree with you. There's going to be some need to make changes, but it's so hard because what are the Oilers going to move? Their biggest assets right now, other than roster pieces, are draft picks and prospects. And I'm not a big fan of if we have to trade a guy like Ethan Bear or Caleb Jones to acquire a defenseman who can help more right now. I want to know, like, how is that defenseman going to help more? Is this like a true offensive defenseman? Because then I'd be on board with it. But if it's someone who's only going to be moderately successful, someone on like a Russell level, and I do see value in Russell, but I'm just saying, like, if it's not a piece that's going to really push the dial forward, then I'm not a big fan of making that move. I think you pretty much have to wait till February and see where your team's at, and then decide, is this the year we maybe move a first round pick to try and acquire a rental piece? But I don't know if I'd be trying to acquire a really big piece right now, especially when we don't know when Sekera is coming back.
So I guess when you look back at the last 10 games, though, I mean, if it could have swung another way, what would have swung it that other way, right? I mean, I think about that. I think, right, like if we had ended up 3-6-1, what changes would we have made? Given having played the same way, maybe puck bounced differently or otherwise, and I think defense would be, number one, and then second to that might be, finding some good sort of fourth line veterans. I despite where we're at, I would say, there's some players that I think need to be better. Obviously, lots has been made of Cassian. Stauffer tweeted that he thought it was their best game, that fourth line's best game of the year, 10 games in. To me, though, 1 out of 10 games, and they've had other games where they've looked all right, but that fourth line hasn't been great, right?
Well, I just thought it was funny that the day after, it's kind of been out there a little bit for a while that this might happen, but the day after Friedman comes out on national television and says that Cassian his agent's been given permission to seek a trade, although I'm not sure what the Oilers would even get back for him. Maybe maybe a fourth round pick, fifth round pick.
Yeah.
So, like, is that just a salary dump to get his $1.9 million off the books? I mean, it might be, and I wouldn't even be totally opposed to it. Although I do like Cassian when he's on top of his game, but I just think let's turn this into more of a positive. I like that the Oilers have some depth right now. Ty Ratty goes out, and a guy like Cooper Marody comes up, and he looks good for a couple games. And, you just see this in the bottom six, that there's more options now. There never used to be options. Who else? Chason's come into the lineup. He didn't play the first 5 games, and now he has 3 goals in the past 4 games. Just to see these replacement guys like next man up come in and start producing, that's something the Oilers never had throughout the decade of darkness. They were lucky to fill out 2 reasonably effective top lines, and then the bottom two lines were not good at all.
Yeah.
And you look at the defense, like barely NHL caliber. So, to put it lightly, that's as nice as we can be. It was an absolute crapshoot those in the early years of the Decade of Darkness, especially. So yeah, I'm just more impressed with how they've had secondary pieces come in and start to, if not score, at least have some level of impact on the game, because that's something they never had. And it's just it's been a real positive sign, I think, early in the season.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. A couple of the things that I've taken away from this first 10 games are, really I think that some of it probably has to do with the new coaching staff. A lot of the things that us spectators and fans were looking at last year and screaming about are in place today. Mm-hmm. And they seem pretty obvious. Don't keep Lucic on the second line, right? Keep Nugent Hopkins up with McDavid. Run Draisaitl on the second line and have him drive his own line. And those things are in play today, and they've been consistent throughout the first 10 games. And that's the other thing that fans and spectators were screaming about, was consistency, right, on the line. That to me is a I just wish we had figured that out earlier last season. And maybe that's Yanni, maybe that's Gulutzan, or maybe that's the coaching staff as a whole. But it's good to see some of those things coming together that seemed so obvious to us last year. Big surprises though this year, is Lucic has come back faster. He's still got sort of cement hands when it comes to bringing the puck in, but I'm watching him. He's making some nice plays, and as a third line guy, he's a top end third line guy, right? He's been good, and he's been throwing his weight around. When he's skating into the zone and the opposing player has the puck. I don't know if you're the same, but I'm at the end of my seat, waiting for the big hit now, right? Kajula's been a nice surprise, because after preseason didn't expect anything from him. And I would say not just McDavid, but Kajula was responsible for the Winnipeg turnaround. He was outstanding. And
I thought Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I thought Lucic would bounce back somewhat this year. I mean, he, by all accounts, was extremely motivated. I heard him on that Spit and Chicklets podcast. Whenever they were talking to him on TSN or 630 Ched, he sounded like a motivated guy. Now, here's the thing: Lucic is never going to be a speedster. He was even asked about it, I think, on Jason Greger's show about, can you drop 10 to 15 pounds? And he said, I mean, yeah, sure I can, but I'm just naturally a big guy.
Yeah.
So even if I drop 10 pounds, I don't think that's going to make me that much faster. That's not his game. He's not a guy who's going to rush the puck up the ice and make a beautiful play in transition. Maybe on a 2-on-1, if you feed him the puck, he can finish off the play if he's up, with a good skater. But that's not going to be the strength of his game. He's going to cycle the puck down low, shrug off checks, try and get the puck into the slot and set something up, and bang away the odd one in front of the net. He came close a couple of times. I mean, how many chances did he have to just have a nice tap in the last few games? I was hoping he'd connect on one of those, but at least he's getting the chances. So some people might be criticizing him because he hasn't scored in 9 games, but honestly, I think we just have to live with the Lucic contract for now. The salary's never going to be something that the fans love, but at the same time, he's he fills a role. He does something, and let's not forget how excited we were when he came to town. So I don't want to be one of the ones who just turns their back on the guy. But yeah, he does have to do a little more. And it's like you said, maybe he has a bit of the cement hands, but as long as he's creating some havoc and banging in the odd goal every few games, then he'll at least be earning somewhat of his salary on the third line.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of one of those going in, and a guy gets a little bit of confidence from that. He's had some brilliant opportunities, and in this league, in order to have those opportunities, you need to be in the right spot, and he's been there. He's been back to driving the net, and it's not an easy league to score in, and he's certainly not known for his finesse. But he'll start tapping some of those in, and I think they'll go in droves. I'm a believer that he's a good part of this team, and I think you just have to, unfortunately, put the contract behind you, and play him where he needs to be played. Right? Don't play him where the contract says he should be played. And that's, I think, so far what they've done. And my hat's off to McClellan for changing what is usually a stubborn stance on these things. And
he definitely likes to lead on his veterans. So
yeah,
we know that.
So big surprises for you this year. What would they be? Some players that have surprised you coming out of the gate, both new and old.
Well, Cooper Marody is one that comes to mind now. Like I said, he's only played 2 games, but I wrote about him in the summer, and I thought that he could be on the team by January, just because there were so many uncertainties when it came to the Oilers' right wing depth, and the fact that he can play any forward position. So that's one. He arrived much earlier than I thought. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to stick around. I think he's actually probably headed back to Bakersfield as soon as Ty Ratty's cleared. But that's one player who's looked good. Kajula has shown me more, or not Kajula, sorry. Yamamoto has shown me more defensive acumen than I thought he had. I knew he was a great stick handler, and I knew that he, could make some pretty plays with the puck and had good playmaking ability. He's shown that in junior when he was arguably the best player in the WHL last year. But I didn't really give him enough credit for how he's able to backtrack and strip pucks, how he's able to draw penalties. So that's been a surprise. And another guy, Tobias Reeder, doesn't have a goal yet, but he's been really racking up the assists lately. And that's a guy who's, moved his way up the lineup. There was a lot of people who said, he's not a fourth line player. Don't play him down there. He's a second or third line guy. And he's looked good since he's come up the lineup. And, I think that first goal is coming. But the fact that he's contributing and on the offensive side of things with setting up some goals, and the fact that he can kill penalties and that he has such good overall quickness, that it makes you think like, man, why did we ever trade this guy years ago for a AHL lifer? That just, it frustrates me that the Coyotes had him all those years. And I guess the last one I'll mention is Alex Chiasson with 3 goals in his first 3 games in an Oilers sweater. So that's a pretty good debut for the guy.
Yeah, no, Chiasson's been a definite welcome surprise, and he even looked good. He's looked good when he's not scoring. So that's just as important, and he's fit well on that second line so far. What's your thoughts on Puljujarvi?
I love the kid, and you know what? It's tough because I think a lot of people are having flashbacks to Yakupov, the way he's being handled, but I don't think it's the same. I think Puljujarvi has a way better skill set for the NHL game than Yakupov did. Mm-hmm. They both were high picks. They both European backgrounds. They both have a good one-timer. But I just think that Puljujarvi thinks the game better, although some people still question his hockey sense. And I think it's a language barrier more than anything, although I'm not in the locker room, so I can't really say for sure. But the thing is people are going to freak out when he gets sat, especially when a guy like Lucic never has to sit in the press box, or, the coach is so hesitant to move one of his veterans off the lineup sheet. So it's tough right now. Like, he sat out a few games, but when the Oilers are winning, he might not want to change the lineup too much either. Although, the few times that he does change the lineup, it's usually a young guy coming out. So yeah, Todd's playing for a job right now, or coaching for a job right now. He doesn't want to lose his job this summer, so the Oilers have to win, and he's probably going with the best lineup. There's some people who don't think that he likes Puljujarvi's game, but we don't really know that for sure either. So I'm just going to say, I think that it'll take some time. He's a young kid. He's 20 years old. It's not going to hurt him that badly to sit out 2 or 3 games, but you don't want him sitting out too long. If he's going to be in the press box for a while, you might as well send him to Bakersfield to get some reps. And while that might be, a shot to the ego to have to go back to the AHL, especially when, this is his 3rd year that he's played parts of NHL games, he probably sees himself as an NHL player now. And there's been times where he's looked fantastic. Like, we see those flashes of brilliance like he had against the Jets. But it's just, it's too far and few between right now. I think it's going to come when he's 22, 23. I believe he'll be a very good NHL player. I'm just hoping he's an Edmonton Oiler when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and my thoughts on Puljujarvi are this. I think, initially I've been very critical of Todd McLellan. As critical as a guy like me can be. I'm never, overly critical, I think, but I give these guys a lot of leeway because they're there in the trenches and seeing things we don't necessarily get to see. But what I when he sat Puljujarvi that first game, I had to ask, like, am I watching the same team? I didn't think Puljujarvi was the guy to sit. I thought maybe Brodziak, right? And and then I as we do, we listen and read other people's material and see what they have to say, and so did I, and I think Jason Greger had the best argument for me, and I won't go through what he said, but I thought, okay, I'm good with this, right? Like, I'm good with them sitting Puljujarvi for a game, and then they sat him again, and I questioned McLellan again, and I wondered, like many people, is there any credence to the McLellan hates Puljujarvi?
No, I don't think he hates him at all.
Yeah,
I think that he just, Todd is definitely gonna lean to his veteran players, but I think that he just sees too many warts in Puljujarvi's game, and sometimes we're thinking to ourselves, well, there's a lot of warts in Lucic's game too. Why doesn't he, ever have to come out of the lineup? But maybe the contract does, force Todd to keep him in there. So it's hard to say. I just think I don't want to be the one to crap on the coach or the player. I think that despite what some people think about Todd McLellan, I do think he's a good coach. I think he's made some questionable decisions at times, but he knows more about hockey than we'll ever know. So I'm not gonna be the one to say that he should be out of a job. As for Puljujarvi, though, I think that there needs to be a better communication between the two, and hopefully the organization does right by him.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with you, and I kind of disagree. I mean, I'm still not a big McLellan fan.
Okay.
And I've probably watched him, as I said earlier. I mean, a lot of the things that he's being successful on this year are things that we as fans and spectators that watched the game last year were yelling and screaming about, that players were remarking during the off season. Notably McDavid, kind of with the offhand comments about consistency on his wings. Everybody was screaming about having Nuge up on the top line. That wasn't McClellan's idea. That was, I would say, everybody else's idea, and one he grudgingly took in what was too late of a season. And you know what? That's the way it is, right? And whether it's McClellan or the coaching staff, they'll get the kudos for a good season if they have one as a group, as a unit. And I think changing out some of the other guys may, with some assistant coaches that are what I would say, capable of leading their own squad, and so they have maybe a bigger voice than the old assistant team did. I think that I think that's going to change how this team is coached, and so I'm happy with that. But with Puljujarvi, the question is, does he not like him? I don't know. I mean, he's never seemed to put Puljujarvi in a place where he can be overly successful. We've asked for 2 years now as fans to see him on the first unit power play, and we've not seen that. We just haven't seen that. Now, here's my thought on it, though, is I'm not against him being sat out that game, not after, having some time for sober thought and considering the, what's gone on. It would have been a completely different story if the Oilers had lost, the last couple games and he's out, and then you're asking, well, what's changed, and then you'd say, well, Puljujarvi's out, and Todd's lost the room, and all of those types of things that quite often come with losing teams. I think winning changes everything, and so we don't necessarily have to look in a microscope on the Puljujarvi situation. We can, but the important part is to your point, is he needs to play, right? And he needs to play somewhere. I think that, it's if he's not going to get a good, successful type of opportunity on the Oilers team, whether that's because of Todd or not, then he needs to be he needs some time in the American League, and back to Gregor's points, he needs to be played in every situation down there, and if he's on a slump, you continue to play him on the first power play, right? Like they've got Woodcroft down there now, who we think sides with development of players, right? We think that's part of the reason why he was sent, that he wasn't just sent to lead a team to the Calder Cup, right? He was sent to develop players so that they could be capable NHLers, and in that case it would be taking Puljujarvi down there and putting him in every situation possible to be successful. I think that may be what happens, especially if this team continues to win games without him. I think it gets harder and harder to find a spot now to put him back in. So you might as well
he'll get back in.
He will. I think
he'll get back in. Like you look at the wingers on this team, and even, some of the bottom six guys like Brodzak and stuff, it's not like they're playing so well that it's impossible for Puljujarvi to get back in. They've shown well at times, but no one's absolutely blown the doors off that they can't get Puljujarvi back in the lineup. So I'm pretty confident we'll see him back in, soon enough. But we may have to be a little patient. I'm not sure if he's going to play in Minnesota or not. I would play him, and I hope they do. But I guess
so. The question is, if you play Puljujarvi in Minnesota, who do you take out?
You could take out. Kara did play all right last game, though.
Like that fourth line, right? I'm
going to bring up their lineup again.
Yeah. Like the fourth line are the guys that you want to keep, right? And the problem you have right now is you're not going to sit Lucic, right? The only person that, and Chason has been, reasonably on fire, right? And
Yep.
Kajula has earned his spot on the lineup, I think. And so you're only, it's either Reeder or Yamamoto. I think that, the challenge there is both of those players bring a skill set that you need in the dynamic of the team. And Puljujarvi changes that dynamic, right? The Reeder's got, sometimes he skates and I think, oh, is that McDavid? No, wait a second, that's Reeder, right? Like he's pretty fast. And Yamamoto, well, he's working hard. I think that the points and the goals will come. But I think he's been a welcome addition on that top line. So my problem is unless if you're taking somebody out of the fourth line, which you can't stick Puljujarvi on the fourth line.
Well, why don't we go through line by line and kind of see like how it would shake down?
Yeah, okay. I mean, we got line one, right? Nuge, McDavid, Yamamoto.
And then do you just go back to Reeder, Draisaitl, Puljujarvi?
I think if you're going to have Puljujarvi in the lineup,
bring him in. Give him a shot in the top six.
You want him in the top six.
He was drafted to be a skill player. Put him in a skill position. Third line, Lucic, Strome, Chason.
Yep.
And then fourth line, maybe Kara, Brodziak, Kassian. So Kajula would come out.
And the challenge I have there is Kajula's earned his spot.
Okay, then so then Chason's not coming out because he's scoring, and Lucic not coming out because of
so you'd have to drop
where he is.
Kara out.
Well, that was the first name. That was the first name I said because I thought like Kassian scored last game, so you're going to reward him with another game. So the reason I thought Kara is the first one that popped to mind is because he's the only one that hasn't scored. I mean, you look at Strome. Strome's a center. So you could bring Strome out and move Kara to center because he can play center. So that's another option. So you move Jujar to third line center, shift Kassian over to left wing on the fourth line, bring Chason down to right wing on the fourth line, and then Puljujarvi could come in either on second or third line right wing and have Kajula on the other wing. So I know that's a lot of names all over the place, but they're going to have to do some line shuffling to make it work.
Yeah, and that's really the only way it's going to happen right now, right? Is you'd have to shuffle the lines up a little bit. The interesting thing, I guess, is I haven't been, with the exception of maybe last game, I haven't been enamored by that fourth line. And, there's something to be said about, a faster, more skilled fourth line in this league than what we're used to. Putting Kajula down there would certainly, sort of check that box off, right? And Brodziak, I don't know if it's an age thing, but he's not been the player that I expected him to be. And then, Kassian has been, with some highlights, he's been a bit of a disappointment so far this year. And I'm a big Kassian fan. In fact, last night I tweeted about how much fun it was to watch him during the first round in 2017. But that fourth line, I mean, what can you do to that to up their game? I mean, make them a presence night after night. I think that's an area I'd like to see, and maybe bringing Puljujarvi in, maybe that changes that dynamic. Maybe you're right.
Agreed. I think that, one way or another, they have to get him back in the lineup, or else he's going to be in the AHL, as we've mentioned already. It's just they have to sort of make up their mind what they're going to do with him pretty soon here, and I think that'll come once they get back to Edmonton.
So actually, that though isn't my biggest concern. My biggest concern with this squad and is the third D pairing. I still what do we do there? I mean, we again back
we
to
kind of addressed it earlier. Like, I mean, I think that they're going to have to bring up some guys because they sort of decided that Kevin Gravel was going to be pushing for a spot in that bottom six. There's going to be Andre Sekera coming back, although he's not going to be at 100%. This is the second straight year he's had a significant injury. I actually thought it might be career ending. So that's a tough one too. I'm honestly not sure if there's an outside option coming in. I think it's going to be internal options to fill it, at least for this season. But I would expect in 2019 or 2020, they really make a push to add a big piece so they can shift some of the guys they have down the lineup and put one of the big acquisitions up further in the lineup.
Yeah. Well, and so some of those big things, you talk about Sekera. What happens when Ratty comes back, right?
Well, that's what Marody will go down.
Yeah, Marody will go down. But you can't have Ratty sitting out. So Yamamoto...
It'll be a competition for jobs then, because then it's going to be guys like Kajula and Puljujarvi, Yamamoto, Ratty, all fighting, especially with Cassian. So there's going to be a lot of right wingers. And the sad thing is, it's a lot of right wingers, but a lot of unproven right wingers. There's some skill there. There's some young skill that could turn in to be some pretty good NHL players at some point. But at the moment, there's still some things that need to be seen from most of those guys. So I would say it's going to be a competition for jobs, which you like, but it'd be nice to have a few more sure things in the mix. But that's been something that Oiler fans have been harping about for months now.
Yeah, it's that's so true, right? I mean, we've been on it about that, and I think what concerns me is when you have a number of guys like that, where you think, Ty Ratty, you think you have to have him on the first line, right? Like he's shown some chemistry with McDavid and Nuge, but how much does that change what's a winning philosophy or a winning strategy right now?
You hate to see a guy lose his job to injury, and it happens in pro sports all the time. But when a guy comes back, he has to work that much harder to get that job back. It's not going to be just handed to him. So here's going to be the dilemma. Do the Oilers go with Kyler Yamamoto, who has a higher ceiling, or a guy like Ratty, who's a better player right now? I look at Yamamoto and I think, okay, this guy, when he's, in his early 20s, mid-20s, I'm going to be really liking this guy in the top six. But he's still just barely 20 years old. And we talked about the things he does well. I mean, he does strip pucks. He does kill penalties. He does play feisty for a little guy. And there is offensive potential there. Watch his highlight packages from his days with the Spokane Chiefs. He can score. He can set up plays. But Ratty is a natural shooter. He's 25 years old. He's got some more experience. This is his sixth pro season. He's been around a little longer than Yamamoto has, and he had great chemistry down the stretch last year and in the preseason with McDavid and Nugent Hopkins. So you want to give him a little more of a look. I felt so bad for the guy when he went down. It's like, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and then he gets an abdominal injury and he's out for 2 weeks. Yeah. So when he does come back, and I believe it's going to be later this week, is supposed to be the return date, or at least the announced return date a couple weeks ago, unless they've updated it. You'd like to see when the Oilers get into November that he gets another chance with Nuge and Connor, because I believe he's smart enough and has the instincts and the good shot to finish off more chances right now than Yamamoto will.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think, he brings something to that line that Yamamoto doesn't bring right now. Will bring later on. Okay, let's close off by talking about the next 10.
All right, I'm going to bring up the schedule here.
Yeah, we've got Minnesota up next, and then Minnesota, Chicago at home. And then we go on a 4-game road trip, which takes us Detroit, and then a tough back-to-back with Washington and Tampa, and then a day of rest in Florida. And then we're back at home for a couple. This would be, so that's 1, 2, 3, that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The next 10 ends with Vegas on the 18th of November. So we're back home against Colorado and Montreal. And then we're in Calgary here on the 17th. And then Vegas on a Saturday. So that's, so we're about 50-50 on home and away in the next 10. And well, I'd say some tough clubs. We got Washington, Tampa Bay, Florida, Colorado, and where Vegas, Montreal, and Calgary and fit. I'm not really sure.
Well, let's look at this. I think Minnesota's playing really well right now. They're surprisingly 6-2-2.
Yeah.
If the Oilers can pull out a win against them, that'd be great. You never want to say they're due for a loss after all the strong play they've had. Let's say they drop that one, win in Chicago on the 1st. So now you're at 500 for this stretch. Detroit, they'll beat them. Washington, I think Washington will get you back. Tampa, the Oilers played well in both games against Tampa last year. Let's even say they get an overtime point there. So you're just one game under 500. They'll beat Florida. Colorado, good team, but the Oilers have got results, positive results against them too. Let's even say, okay, well, say they drop that one, beat Montreal, beat Calgary, and beat Vegas. I think those are all winnable games. So now we're looking at, how many wins did I say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So something like 6-4. Could they do that in 10 games? I think that'd be a pretty good run.
Okay, I'm gonna hold you to that. Let me see
mark me down for 6-4.
Marking you down for 6-4. All right. So if I had to guess, Minnesota. I think I think going into these 2 home games, if I was actually worried about one, it would be Chicago coming back. And Kane having a stellar game against us on Thursday. But I wouldn't be surprised if we split these next 2. And even with a split, I wouldn't be surprised if we got 3 of the next 4 points. And then Detroit should be a win. So that's 2 wins for sure. Washington and Tampa. I mean, that's going to be a tough one, but I feel like this team can split those back-to-backs most nights now. We'll see. So let's go 3 wins there, 4 wins with Florida, Colorado, 5. I might go 6-3-1. Another 6-3-1.
Okay.
Looking at this,
I wouldn't even mind stretching it a little further, because there's another question I want to ask you. They got 2 games after that against the Sharks and the Ducks. Now, they play the Ducks the day after American Thanksgiving, and they usually say wherever you are at American Thanksgiving is where you'll likely be for the rest of the year. So let's even say that they let's say they drop one to the Sharks and they beat the Ducks, because I think that's how those 2 games will go. So if my 6-4 record comes to fruition, and that goes with their current record plus those 2 that I added in, that means the Oilers would be at 27 points in 27 out of 44 points, which at an 82 game pace is 100.6. We'll round up to 101. So they usually say, however you are at Thanksgiving, and when I say they, I mean, the mainstream media.
Yep.
Wherever you are at American Thanksgiving is how you'll finish up. So if the Oilers do play up to their potential and, reach the records that you and I were pretty close, like one point off.
Yep.
that would put them at 101 points, 101 point pace. That's should be more than enough to make the playoffs. I think at that point we're looking at probably second place in the Pacific behind San Jose. So what do you think about that?
I think it's pretty accurate. And you and I had this conversation on earlier pod. We both thought the Oilers were a playoff team this year. I think given what we've seen so far, with not just with the Oilers but with the other teams, 101 points doesn't seem unrealistic. That would put us right near the bottom half of any of the divisions, right? Probably in the 5-6 spot. If I look at last year, number 5 had 4 and 5 at 101 points each. And then San Jose was 6th with 100 points. So that 100-point area is right middle of the pack.
I'm pretty sure that 5 teams are coming out of the Central this year, though. You look how strong that team looks, or how strong that division looks. So if the Oilers are going to make the playoffs, I really believe they're going to have to finish third.
Yeah, they'd have to finish, second or third easily. Yep. Yeah, and if you look at last year, right, we had Vegas and Anaheim up there at 1 and 2. I thought that Vegas would kind of be, finish a little bit lower than they did last year. I didn't think they were as good as they were hyped up to be. They lost 2 key components last year in Perron and Neal, and granted they picked up somebody, but it's a different team.
I thought they'd come down to earth too. There were so many factors. I mean, that tragic shooting just before the home opener in Vegas last year. The fact that they were an expansion team full of cast-offs who had something to prove, and there was some underrated skill there. I mean, they picked some pretty good players out from teams across the league, and they were able to put that all together. Plus, fantastic goaltending from Marc-Andre Fleury, who didn't even play the full year. There was a lot of factors to why they made the Cup final, and they deserve to be there. But this year, I think they will be challenged to make the playoffs. Yeah,
and also, I mean, the Schmidt suspension, among other things. You can't have. You're going to be fighting after those first 20, and I thought they were going to be fighting as it was. So, I think they'll be in the bottom half and fighting for that. Anaheim, is starting to come down to earth a little bit. Nobody expected the fast start that they had.
Well, before we go, I'd love to get your one more take on who you think will be in the playoffs 10 games in. I don't think we talked about it before the season, because when I look at the Central, I think St. Louis could still bounce back, but I look at the 5 teams who are currently in the playoff spots, and I think that's the 5 who will be there. I think, Nashville, Winnipeg, Colorado, Chicago, Minnesota will all get there. I don't know if you agree with those 5, but who it's more importantly what I'm setting up is, because 5 will get there, who do you think the 3 will be coming out of the Pacific?
Yeah, so I think Vancouver is going to come down to earth.
Oh, obviously, they're already declining.
Yeah. So if we take Vancouver out in the Pacific, I would say I think San Jose, is a shoe-in. I think they had their little bit of a slow start, but they're over that now. So San Jose, I think the Oilers are in, and then I think I would have to actually say Calgary.
Me too.
Just given the way they've played. Although they don't look as good, I think, as everybody thought they were going to be. I think they're still, a good team, and could. The thing is, the Pacific actually is pretty weak this year, if I look at it. And so, the year to make it is this year for Edmonton and Calgary. San Jose is your biggest threat, and so I think Edmonton and Calgary can make it this year. And then I think you're right about the Central. I mean, and you could have Dallas or St. Louis even in that mix. That's how good that division is.
Yeah. So when you look at everything, if it shakes out the way it is, I think Nashville's going to get the top spot in the conference. So with the Jets right behind them. So they're going to play the second wild card. San Jose would play the top wild card team, and then you look at number 2 and number 3. If that's Edmonton and Calgary, we're talking about the first Battle of Alberta playoff series since 1991. And
I'd love it. I would love every moment of it.
And I one of the things that I shouldn't say regret, I can't control my birth certificate, but I was 2 years old when that series took place, when Esa Tikkanen scored that incredible goal to finish them off. And man, like I always talk about, I wish I could have seen the 80s. I guess I was at least alive for that series in 91. but at 2 years old, I don't retain many memories from that series. So I don't know if you can recall it better than I can, but I would love to. I'd love to see Calgary and Edmonton play in the playoffs.
Yeah, I've got some good memories from then, but nothing would beat if it was modern day for sure. And as much as I love to see Calgary lose, I still I'd rather they were in the playoffs and below us than out of the playoffs.
And I'm sure as an Oilers fan living in Calgary, you would find a way to make it to at least one of those games.
Oh, you bet I will.
I may join you for one of those if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, let's close it off and look forward to your quick prediction on tomorrow's game.
Yeah, well, first I just want to say thanks again for having me, Mike. Awesome to come on again, and this was definitely the most positive one. We don't have to talk about a draft or the World Championships, which has sadly become Oilers playoffs over the past decade. Sorry, get your question again. The game for tomorrow.
Oh yeah, quick prediction.
Well, I mean, I did say the Oilers were due for a loss. I hope I'm wrong. My head's telling me a 3-2 loss, but I'm hoping it's going to be a 4-2 win or something like that for Edmonton.
All right. Well, Minnesota's due for a loss too, so I'm going to go with a breakout performance with Lucic getting on the board tomorrow night and Yamamoto. Let's go 5-2.
5-2. Anything for Connor?
He'll get his typical 2 points.
He'll get his typical.
Quickly, before you go, was there like any doubt in your head when it went to overtime that Connor was going to score?
Did you mean on the 2-on-1 or just in general?
In general, when overtime started,
I can't say that it was in my. I can't say that I knew Connor was going to score, but I knew that the Oilers had a good chance to win. They did lose to the Blackhawks in overtime last year, but those two are as close to money as it comes. And I can quickly tell you, if I can give you a quick stat before I go. Yeah, I'm currently writing an article on Draisaitl and McDavid in overtime. Awesome. And do you want it in the 3 years that they've been line mates to some extent, or played on the power play together, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, since 2016-17, so the past 2 seasons and a little bit this year, do you know how many overtime goals that both of them have connected on?
Well, I can't even wager a guess. I'm curious though.
It's 9.
Wow, it's awesome.
So I'm currently putting together a piece on some of their best showing is in overtime, and but that's pretty great that in 2 years and the first 10 games of this season they've both factored in on 9 overtime goals together. So those two are as close to a sure thing as possible. Absolutely deadly.
That's awesome. That is amazing, and we're lucky to have them. All right, you have yourself a great day, and looking forward to tomorrow's game and having you back on again soon.
Yeah, thanks again, Mike. We'll do this again.
Thanks.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and Guess. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.